Howdy do, ladies and turds. We're here. We got Pablo in the chat. We have Glue in the chat. And in about 4 minutes, as you see here, right there, they're going to reveal some news on the PlayStation 5. I don't think this is going to be like a, like an E3 thing where they have trailers and stuff, like crazy gameplay and whatnot. I don't think it's going to be like that, but we'll see. It's probably just going to be some fun facts and whatnot. But finally, we get something, because I don't know how long they've showed this. All we know about the PlayStation 5 is it's being made, it's coming out on the holidays, and there's the logo. That's all we know. And then yesterday, Microsoft, oh no, what was it? I think it was around Christmas or something, or New Year, when the Game Awards happened. They revealed the Microsoft Xbox Series X. That's such a weird name too. And I was looking at a video yesterday because they're giving some YouTubers, not me of course. I'm not well known for that. But they were giving some people, like, letting them try it, like open it, look inside, play some games. And I remember one of the videos I looked at, they asked the guy, like, what is the name of this thing? Is it like Xbox Series X or what? And the guy's like, oh no, it's just Xbox. And I'm like, what kind of bootleg? Like, the Xbox was the original Xbox, my boy, which I probably have over there somewhere. The original Xbox is the Xbox. And then they had, Xbox 360, and then they had Xbox One, and now they have Xbox again, except it's called Xbox Series X. It's just confusing, the name. Whereas with this, I guess you have, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Xbox, more like 6. Oh my lord, MTZ. It's confusing though, right? Like, when I say before the Xbox One, Xbone was even a thing, I would say Xbox One, like, to say the original Xbox. And now I have to say original Xbox. And now with this new one coming out, it's going to be also again, like, oh, okay, so there's original Xbox, then there's the Xbone, and now there's the new Xbox. It's a little all over the place. But hi, MTZ. You haven't been here in a while. You can share stories. Did you grow up with the PlayStation? If you did, what kind of games did you have? I grew up with the PlayStation 1 after my cousins. I think they had a fight or something. I think somebody spilled some kind of drink or soda on the PlayStation. And then their dad, my uncle, he took the console and gave it to us. And then that's how, my story grew up, or my story started with the PlayStation. And then, of course, I had, Crash Bandicoot 2, 3, Spyro 2, Bugs Life, Tarzan, Tomba was awesome, the demo, Einhinder. There's like a lot of games we played, but yeah, that's where it all started, of course. And then one Christmas we got a PlayStation 2 with ATV Off-Road Racing or something, and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. And now, in like 2 weeks or something, we got a remaster on the Switch for Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. That's gonna be awesome. Then I think Pap got a PlayStation 3. He bought it, I think, with his cash on a birthday. And then Phil got one for Black Friday. He bamboozled my mama. And now the PlayStation 5 is here. So that's the story with that. But yeah, we have like a million PlayStation 2 games. So I'm hoping this one, the new console, is backwards compatible, so I can play, those PlayStation 2 games in HD instead of having to buy like a $1 million like converter or something, or capture card or whatnot, because that would be quite convenient, as also with PlayStation 1 games and PlayStation 3 games. Oh. Can you hear that? Is that loud enough? Testing, testing. It's cheesy. So I guess it's already pre-recorded if it's a premiere, because this is the screen they do to premiere. We're gonna go in HD, my boys. Alright, I'm gonna try to fix this for 2 seconds, ladies and turds. Just so you don't get that random. There you go. That's better. But yeah, welcome to Stream Everyone. Here we go. Like I said, my biggest thing, I hope that it's not, or that it's backwards compatible. You know, that would be awesome. As well as if it's not $1,000,000, I probably won't be able to, you know, get one either way. Unless, you know, people, you know, support me on Patreon, of course. But I probably won't get one anytime soon. Oh geez, wait, is my thing bootlegging? 2 seconds, ladies and turds. Let me fix the screen here so it's not like cut off for anyone. There we go. That's better. But yeah, that's all I want is, like, I guess backwards compatibility. I hope this thing works. It's not $1,000,000. And for the rumors to be true, for the Silent Hill, you know, remake or revival to be true. I don't think we're gonna see any of that here though, but who knows?
Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC, but we do have some super exciting news about.
Is that loud enough, or is that kind of quiet?
Who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny? Without further ado,
put that
over to
really
you,
loud here.
Thank you, Jim.
It's one of these.
There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games.
Kind of quiet.
Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console.
They're just, this guy's really quiet. I remember this guy. He's really quiet.
Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of
Tell me
learning
it's
by the
backwards
game
compatible,
developers, hopefully
please.
not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete series.
Oh yeah, I think they've shown the
For PlayStation
Spider-Man.
consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking
They showed
console,
a
but also one that
demo for
caused
Spider-Man
quite a lot of
loading in
problems,
like
as it
2
was initially
seconds.
difficult to develop games for.
I remember that.
So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games, which is to say that game creators matter.
Hopefully you can hear that though.
Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every
I was gonna say, are those
year,
actually
take a
people
tour of
sitting
the
there?
industry.
But
I
they
go to
are.
the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving.
Oh yeah, I think Microsoft has a 1 terabyte SSD you can upgrade or something on the new Xbox.
It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of
I remember this guy now. He was the one who last time
now, with
his
PlayStation
quiet
1,
voice.
2, and 3, the target was a
I remember we were
revolutionary
saying
time
that he was like a
with
serial
brand new
killer or
features.
something.
That was great in many ways, but
I forgot where
time
we
for
saw
the
him. I think it was
developers to get up
E3.
and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running.
I don't know if you can hear that though, or if it's too quiet, because this guy's voice is real quiet.
If we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us as the hardware team to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM.
But yeah, this is like a developer kind of talk. So like I said, I don't think we're going to get anything like fancy or anything. Trailers and whatnot, like an E3 reveal. But we might at least get something to see the console and like...
regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles. The first being enabling the desires of developers.
Finding new dreams. I don't know why that's so funny.
To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it? That was a discussion we were also having internally.
I remember the PSP was kind of bootleg. I love my PSP, my boy. But the memory cards for the PSP were like $1 billion. You know? And so hopefully here, they don't do the same thing, where you have to use a specific kind of hard drive or whatever, just to, you know, upgrade the PlayStation 5. Because that'd be bootleg too.
I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the
Isn't it kind of crazy?
Which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds.
Your mom isn't fast or flexible. Yuck. Can you hear it though, MTZ? Like, is it loud enough?
We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disk and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files.
Yeah, he's real quiet. I can, like I say, if anything, I can try to turn it up a little. But hopefully...
My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking, and only 1/3 of its time actually loading.
Is that better? Hopefully.
Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20
Yeah, he's real quiet, but I just don't want anything to explode. If they do show, you know, something.
Is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD,
But yeah, I
you
was
can
gonna
read
say
data
it's
from
kind of crazy
1,000 different
that
locations in
he
the
took my
world.
fast SSD. Oh my
As for
lord.
time to
I was
load
gonna say
a
it's kind of
gigabyte,
crazy
this is
that
next
like,
gen we're talking
what was it,
about.
maybe
So
just
memory
20
is
years
bigger.
ago,
Instead, we should be
right?
asking how long to
Wait, no,
load
20
2
years.
gigabytes. And the
Oh my lord,
answer
20
is
years ago
about
was
a quarter of a
PlayStation
second.
2.
I mean, that's amazing.
Never
We're
mind.
talking 2 orders
It's
of
crazy, like
magnitude,
30
meaning
years ago,
very roughly
you know, we were having the
100 times faster.
like 8-bit
Which means at 5 gigabytes
games
a
and
second
whatnot,
for the SSD,
and
the
now you have
potential is
something that
that
looks,
the
you
game
know,
boots in a second.
realistic. It's
There
kind
are
of
no
crazy.
load screens. The game just
Hard to
fades down
imagine.
while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte
I don't know why
can
things
sabotage the game
he's saying
the
is kind of
developer
cheesy.
is trying to create.
Gives it
I think
freedom.
almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want textures and models to fill out, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds.
I wouldn't mind the new Crash Bandicoot.
Haven City when we were making Jak 2.
Oh.
The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty pieces are there for a reason.
30 seconds to enjoy my
subset of
assets.
level
Oh
design
my
dedicated
lord.
to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction.
I wouldn't
for a
mind a new
team that
Crash Bandicoot.
just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target
Eliminate
was streaming.
loads.
As in,
There you go, MTZ.
what
There's
if
another
the
one for you.
SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second. If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy
Oh
for
my lord.
increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks
Good
of data.
enough.
For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that
400
cramp
mailboxes,
creative
oh
director's
boy.
style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have
It'd be
noticed
kind of
that
cool
after a
to
patch
make a
download,
game.
a PlayStation 4
Probably,
will
you know,
sometimes take a long time to
takes a
install
while,
the
but
patch.
I think it'd be kind
That's
of cool.
because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or 2. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the
But yeah, I
changes
thought these people here
incorporated,
sitting here,
which
I thought they were
means
fake.
no
But that guy
installs
on the
as
left,
you
he
know
moved.
today.
So, you know, they're actually sitting there.
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system
I thought it
memory
was
can
just,
be
you know,
used
like
much more efficiently.
silhouettes or something.
On PlayStation 4, game data
Well, I
on
guess
the
it is,
hard
but you
drive
know what I
feels
mean.
very
I thought it was like
distant
just a
and difficult
picture.
to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you
More
realize
RAM?
you need a piece of data, you can
You know
just
how to make
load
your
it from the SSD and use
computer
it. There's no need to
faster
have lots of
and
data
more
plugged in
RAM.
system memory waiting to potentially be
Of
used.
course.
A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set
here we
of
go.
targets.
The dream
Boot
again.
the game in a second. No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk.
Isn't
and
that
more
what they
game on
said
the
in,
SSD. And finally,
you know,
those patch installs.
with every new console?
The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD
Not twisty
and the game
package
code that uses
passage.
the data.
Oh my lord.
You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times
Have you played
faster.
God of War?
It was that game loads
I think
and
Pap and
streaming
Phil
would be
finished
100
it, but
times faster. So
I haven't tried it
every
yet.
single potential
Now I
bottleneck
can't, of
needed to be
course,
addressed.
because
And
Phil
there
has
are a
the
lot of them.
PlayStation 4.
Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data
You did?
is loaded
Did you like
into
it?
system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's
I
examined.
think
a few
I've
values are tweaked to
maybe
check-in,
played the
and then it's
original
moved
a
to
little
its
bit,
final location.
because we have
At
those,
the
but
SSD speed
I never
we're
finished
talking
it.
about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD.
Exploration title
To
thingy.
solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip.
I think it was supposed to be different
Flash
from the other
controller in
ones.
the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And
I
while
swear they
those
look like
textures are being
silhouettes.
loaded, an enemy
Or like,
shot
you know,
and has
images.
to speak
Just
a
people
few
sitting there.
dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the
Like they're
audience
not even
hear those
moving.
dying
Especially this
words
guy on the right over there.
immediately.
He looks uncomfortable. The one sitting
On
like
one
this,
side,
sideways.
that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console.
Just wanna know
Ultimately,
if
we
it's
resolved this question by
backwards
looking at the play
compatible.
patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD.
Do you remember
We were able
what your
to
first
establish that
console
the
was?
friction caused by
Or like your first
reinstalls
game
or
that you
redownloads
played,
are
MTZ?
quite low. And so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment. Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O.
Hefty.
Before we talk about what that does,
Chevy
let's
D's a
talk
hefty
compression
boy.
for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom
And
decompressor
Kraken, there's
into the
another
IO
one for
unit,
you.
one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor
I hope they at
equates
least
to none
show
of
what
our
it looks
Zen 2
like.
cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken
I know this is
stream
like a
with
developer talk
conventional
and all that
CPU.
stuff, but
There's a lot more in the custom
you know,
IO
I hope
unit,
they at least show
including a
what
dedicated
the
DMA controller. The game can direct
PlayStation 5 is
exactly
supposed to look
where
like
it
and
wants
like
to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or two in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound
people
like
in
anything
the
related to the SSD, but a
on
lot
the
of
PlayStation
developers
stream,
map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become
they're all
a
over the
bottleneck.
place. Oh my lord!
There
Like the
are
chat
coherency engines
can
to
show you
assist
if
the
you want to see.
coprocessors. Coherency comes up
Look
a
at
lot
them
of
go.
places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches.
Just gonna hide that up
Flushing
close.
all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches
Scrubbers.
do pinpoint
I'll
evictions
scrub them
of just
cheeks.
those address ranges. The best thing is,
Sorry.
as a game developer,
I
when
had
you
to.
read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabytes a second really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4,
100
and allow
times.
the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to
Super
become
duper
a
fast.
reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite good.
I'll show you
It's
something
constant,
that can
and we may very well
expand.
want to add storage to whatever we put in the console. Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation
Okay, so I
5
guess
titles,
he said you can.
ideally you
Backwards
would add
compatible
your SSD storage.
with PlayStation
We will
4,
be supporting certain M2 SSDs.
but
These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5.
oh, that's awesome.
As for
Okay,
which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment.
so he just
They connect
confirmed
through
also
the
that
custom
you
I/O
can use
unit,
any
just
hard
like
drive,
our SSD does.
but I guess
So
there's
they
a
can
few that
take
are
full
compatible.
advantage of the decompression, I/O
That's awesome.
coprocessors, and
So it's
all
not going to
the
be bootleg
features
like with the PSP.
Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting in samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate
They're trying to
the
convince
extra
you to get
priorities
theirs, of
rather
course.
than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs
Like I said, the
a little
problem
extra
with
speed to take care
the
of issues
PSP
arising
and
from a
like
different
the
approach.
whole SD card thing
That commercial drive also
was
needs
that it
to
cost like $1
physically
million
fit
just
inside
to
of the
get
bay
a
created in PlayStation 5
what, like
for
2
M2
gigabyte
drives.
SD card. It was like
Unlike internal hard drives,
$50 to
there's
$100
unfortunately
for the
no standard
PSP.
for the
I was
height
like, what
of
the
an M2
turd?
drive. And some M2 drives have giant heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year-end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games.
And then with the Xbox
Once we've done that
Series
compatibility
X,
testing, we should be able
I don't know
to
if they
start looking at
confirmed that
which
it's backwards
drives will
compatible
physically
with
fit
all
and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but
previous
it's likely to be
generations.
a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU.
It has revealed how
We
far
need
Xbox
new
will push.
GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more
It'll play
performance, it's not
existing
really a
Xbox
new
One games as
generation
well
of
as 360 and original
Of course,
Xbox
many
titles.
of these capabilities result from more
Nice.
performance. That's part of why
But
a
I don't
PlayStation
think
5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation
I don't think
4
those are
teraflop.
the
But
discs.
we aren't just looking for
Maybe.
performance. We also need the ability
Like I don't
to
think
do
it's
something
every
with the
single
GPU
game.
that could
That'd be
not have
awesome.
been done.
I think it's just the ones that are like on the list,
And we need higher performance.
which is still
Why?
really cool that you
Every
can do
time we
that. Like you
double
can
the
put the disc in there and
performance
play
of some
those.
GPU component,
But
we don't want to find
Jet Set
out
Radio
double
Future
the
isn't
power
one of
consumed
those,
and the
apparently.
heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean?
I looked it up and it said
AMD
like
is
on the
continuously improving
Xbox
and
Series
revising their
X,
tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to
the
reduce
games
power
like
consumption
automatically
by
get like updated or
re-architecting the
some
GPU
junk,
to put data close to where it's needed, to
which would be awesome if
optimize the
it worked
GPU
with
for
every
performance,
single
and to
game.
adding new, more
Hopefully
advanced
when
feature
the
set.
thing comes out it
But
will,
that feature set is malleable,
but I don't know.
which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely
Talking about
on
them flops
teraflops as
now,
an
of
absolute
course.
indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean?
Oh.
One way you can achieve backwards
Oh.
compatibility is to put the previous console's
Yes,
chipset
please.
in the new console,
Please
like
tell
we
me.
did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips. meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes.
But tell me
One
that.
advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD,
Please
as any
tell me.
roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence.
I just
in
want to
logic.
know.
Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis.
Oh, that's bootleg.
Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5.
But what? Just PlayStation 4
With
games
regards
or
to
more?
new features, as I said, our strategy was
Come
to
on
try to
now.
break new ground, but at the same
Is the
time
PS4
not to
the only
require
thing going to
use
be
of the new
compatible?
GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability.
The brain, of
Using
course.
primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based
I think
GPU is ray tracing, using the same
Xbox
strategy
showed
as
the
AMD's
same thing.
upcoming PC GPUs.
Ray tracing for
The
the
CUs
Minecraft,
contain
though.
a new specialized
It
unit
looked real
called the
pretty, of
intersection
course,
engine,
but it was
which can
kind of only
calculate
shown
the
on
intersection
Minecraft.
of rays with boxes and triangles.
At least from what I've
To
seen.
use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion
But
and
tell
some
me about.
reverb calculations.
He's only talking about
With a bit
PlayStation
more
4
of the
games
GPU
being backwards
invested in ray
compatible,
tracing, it should be possible to do
which
some
is
very
cool.
nice global illumination.
But
Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's 2 possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate
I swear, if
teraflops,
he
you
wanted
get
to,
the
he
same
could
number.
be
But
a serial
actually, the
killer.
performance is noticeably
I don't know why I
lower
keep
because
saying that, but like,
teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. and those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console.
I don't recognize that symbol.
Power consumption varies a lot.
There's a shotgun.
When I play God of
Bow and
War
arrow.
on the PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutia of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan.
I don't really know what they're talking about.
So, after much discussion,
kinda
we
just
decided to
going
go
on
with a
about
very
stuff.
different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2
I'm not a developer,
CUs
of course,
are large. Each has 62%
so I don't really
more transistors than the CUs we were
understand
using on
most of the
PlayStation
stuff
4.
he's saying.
So, if we compare transistor counts,
But it is
36
interesting.
RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say
geez,
we
sorry about
continuously
that.
run the GPU and CPU
Just moving the
in
chat.
boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at
Gonna make a
essentially
doodle
constant power and let the frequency
as we watch
vary
this.
based on We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team.
Oh, are they going to actually show the console right now?
How
Hopefully.
fast can we run the
Hopefully,
GPU
hopefully.
and CPU with this strategy? The
a
simplest
teardown,
approach would be
so
to look at the actual
maybe.
temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature
Here, I'm
of
just
the
gonna-
silicon die, we look at the
I'll share my
activities
doodle
that
here.
the GPU and CPU are performing and set the
Let's doodle
frequencies on that basis,
while we
which makes
kinda
everything
listen in the
deterministic
background.
and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart
There
Shift
you go.
technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more.
I can't see him right now, of course.
The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most
I haven't
of its
played
time at or
Spider-Man
close
yet
to
either.
that frequency and
I really wanted to, but they
Similarly,
bootlegged it.
running the CPU at 3
By not
gigahertz was
having
causing
the
headaches
pizza
with the
side
old
missions, you
strategy.
gotta have those.
But now we can run it as high as
That was the one
3.5
thing I was
gigahertz.
hoping for.
In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding new dreams. It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the
Hoarder
audio
games,
team on a game
when you
project
have
has to do a
nothing
lot
going
with
on
the
in
audio.
hoarder games,
For
that gives me a
example,
heart
on
attack.
PlayStation 4, there's
Like when it's
fierce
just quiet,
competition for the Jaguar CPU
like I
cores.
poop myself.
Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second.
It's pretty effective
but audio
too.
processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous
I used to
TNA,
have that
and
laptop.
frequently
It wasn't the
reach
exact
100%
same
utilization of the floating
thing,
point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on
but the
PlayStation 4.
VAIO, VAIO.
Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual
Probably
VR.
going to talk about the
PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to
I still
where
want to
we
play
could go
the
with audio,
Resident
as well
Evil
as some
in
valuable
VR.
experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals
I want to poop
for
myself.
audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not just something we thought
You've
could
entered the
achieve.
matrix.
The idea was that if
Oh,
we
kinda
stopped using
cheesy.
just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of
And there's
real
my dream right
presence
there,
inside the
that the
virtual world
PS5
of the game.
will play
This has the
PS4,
capacity
3,
to
2,
affect your
and 1 games.
appreciation of the game,
So far they've
just
only
like
said it can
music
play
in a game
PlayStation 4
does.
games.
The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from. To the right of you, behind you, above you. This
So,
can immerse you
I don't
further
know.
in the
I don't know
game,
if
and it can also directly enhance the gameplay.
I'm very hopeful, of course.
To use Dead Space as an example,
Dead
I know,
Space,
old
it's so
school.
good.
You're fighting enemies in fairly dark, spooky locations.
Wait, are
Back
they?
in the day, if you played the game using the TV
I don't think Dead
speakers, you
Space
could
is
tell that
on.
there was one last enemy
I think it was only on
growling and
PlayStation
hunting
3,
you down,
so
but it was
hopefully
difficult to tell
if it's
quite
backwards
where that
compatible, you
was.
can play it, because I
With
would love
headphones, you
to.
could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right.
The
which
first
let you
one is the only one I
deduce, if you couldn't
finished.
see it, that it must be somewhere behind
Dead Space 1 all
and
the
to your
way.
right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So,
And then
how
you
do
get
we know
bootlegged.
where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, all those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary
explanation of how the
depending on
ear
frequency
works, of
the
course.
sound.
The ear
Head
canal.
size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes based on direction and frequency can be encoded in a table called the head-related transfer function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22
Wait, a microphone
speakers.
in their ear?
We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
That looks like a weird
Using an HRTF when
like
rendering audio
torture
creates
device.
unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies. This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches.
He keeps
just
bringing
like
up
an
the
SPU.
PlayStation 3.
All
Please.
data access is via DMA, just like an SPU.
I want to play
target
my
is that we
copy of
have
Scenic,
more
of course.
power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU thanks to the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted
I always thought that was
audio
a
for all,
kind of a strange
not
name.
just those with licensed
Dolby.
soundbars or the like.
It's like
Also, we
dopey.
wanted many hundreds of sound sources, not just the 32 that Atmos supports. And finally, we wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of
I remember
algorithms
playing
that has to be invented,
Corpse
tuned,
Party on
and
the
implemented
PSP.
to realize our vision for 3D
Oh,
audio
jeez. Oh,
is
my Lord.
immense.
On the
For
PSP,
example, use
with
of
3D audio,
HRTFs in games is quite
it was
complex.
really cool.
Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's
Corpse
coming
Party is like a horror
from
game
one of those
on the
1,000
PSP.
HRTF
I
sample
played with the
locations.
headphones on, and it was
But
like,
for high
oh
quality
man,
3D game audio,
it was awesome.
we
It
have to
spooked
handle
me.
other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers.
I swear those people aren't real
surround
anymore.
sound set up with 6
They can't
or
be
more
sitting that
speakers,
still. I mean,
all
that
of
guy's
which need
moving,
different approaches.
but he did that movement in the
That's a
beginning.
lot
I
of
swear.
variations. It's nice to have the computational
swear it's
resources
just like
of the
a-
Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with
They're
3D
not
audio
sitting
is
there,
going to be
I
a
swear.
multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the
The
sound
sweet
can be
spot.
made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio in PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on
wasn't
setups with
expecting
more
this to be,
speakers,
you
such
know,
as 6-channel surround sound.
Kind of.
It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games
You know,
in
that
development are
exciting, but
extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle
this is
between
kind of
conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio
with
and our
the
new
tablet.
3D audio. I listened with just an
This is a
ordinary
little rusty,
pair
of course.
over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it.
The way he
Conventional
said that.
stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So,
You know what?
a big advancement, but
While
have
he's
I entered
talking,
the Matrix? Does my
I'm
brain
going to
believe
read
I'm
this to
really
myself.
there, like I was talking about earlier
Seeing
when
if
I
the heat
explained
fogs.
our target of presence? Well, the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine. It was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit
These
to the
doodles
total
are so
game
cool.
playing audience. This shows a piece
Toilet.
of the
It's
default
a toilet.
HRTF on the left and my HRTF
Forget
on the
what
right.
page I
You
was
can see
on.
that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice
still
of
talking
5
about the audio.
HRTFs.
It's kind
There's
of
a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest HRTF.
Photo
from the
of your
library.
ear.
Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head.
I
and we'll
am
make
not
a
sending you
3D
my
model
ear,
of them and
mister.
synthesize the HRTF.
My ear.
Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in.
They
on
just
the
collect like
HRTF
millions of
that gives you
pictures
the
of
highest
people's
score,
ears.
meaning that it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone
The
to
PlayStation 4, I
experience
think,
that
came out in
next level
2012,
of
right?
realism.
That's crazy.
Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate.
I remember
a bit
watching
about our
the
design and
release, like the
decision-making process today,
person who got the
and why
first
PlayStation
PS4,
5 has the feature set that
2013,
it does. Now
November
comes the
15,
fun part. We get to see
2013.
how the development
I remember
community takes
watching it on
advantage
my
of that
Wii U,
feature set. I'm
like the
hoping for the
gamepad.
completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the
It's kinda
capabilities of the
crazy.
SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time.
That's
today.
it? Really? They didn't even show what it looks like. They didn't. That was kind of bootleg. I mean, they talked a lot, but the turd was that? Come on now. What the butt stuff was that? Cancel. What? Scammed. Scammed. Yeah, that was kind of bootleg. I thought they would at least show what it looks like, and I guess it's, you know, he just disappeared. Well, they didn't show how much it would cost. Like I said, I guess that's not, you know, what this is supposed to be. But yeah. Alright, that's it. I got nothing else to say. Doodles, everyone.